Hello students, my name is Dr. Harshad Bhanushali. I will be solving the Neet 2021 biology paper. The version what I'll be solving would be the version M5. You already know this is the first time we are having a different paper pattern whereby you have the compulsory section, you have the optional section, the compulsory section with botany and zoology, as well as the optional section of botany and zoology. We all know that the optional section you had to solve 10 questions out of the 15 in each of the part 1 as well as part 2. If you ask about the overall impression about the paper, I would say it is in a relatively easy paper, which has been a trend for the past few years now with regards to NEET biology. All in all, the paper had every question which came from NCERT. The number of match the columns were constant like every year. True and false questions were constant. What I found missing this year was the diagram based questions which we expected. What we also didn't find is the questions on dates. There were no questions on the researchers. And even the match in the column questions and the true or false questions were not that complicated. It was a pretty straightforward options which were given. Even the single option type of questions were pretty straightforward. So all in all, my opinion about the paper is a pretty standard and an easy bio paper, which is completely from the NCERT. We'll now start with the solving of each and every individual question of the paper. Let us start solving the paper now. We would be starting with the part 1, which is in that we will be solving the compulsory section first. That is section A. The very straightforward question, the first one, mutations in plant cells can be induced by. If you remember, this is the part of mutation breeding, which is there in the chapter enhancement, and the option which is there, which is used to induce mutations, is gamma radiations, to be precise. That is what is your NCERT line. The next question is a straightforward match the following question, which talks about the first list, which says cells with active cell division capacity. We will solve it. Tissues having cells similar in structure and function. This is a type of tissue which includes your parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma, which is your simple permanent tissue. So B will be 4. So A will be meristematic tissue. That is, A will be 2, B will be 4, that is simple tissue. Then you have tissues having different types of cells. That is your vascular tissue. So vascular tissue, there's a spelling error here. So it should be vascular tissue. So C will be 1. So A will be 2, B will be 4, and C will be 1. Dead cells with thickened would be D3. So we have A2, B4, C1, and D3. Yeah, so my bad. The option which is correct here would be option number 1. We go on to the next question now. Which of the following step is the step of PCR reaction? If you remember, the first step involves heating, and in that heating, we have a step which is called as denaturation, then primers join, which is annealing, followed by the elongation of chain, that is extension. So the answer for this question would be the option number 1. The next question is again a match the column, which we had a large number. If you remember, lenticels are present on the surface for exchange of gases. So that's A3. You have cork cambium, which is the outermost layer. Now, again, you have cork cambium, which is called as the phelogen because it generates something which is called as phellem, if you remember. Then you have secondary cortex. Now, secondary cortex is called as pheloderm, so that is C4. And cork is basically thick-walled because of deposition of suberin. So D will be 2. So you have A3, B4. Again, if you see there's only one option with A3, that's option number 2. So that would be our answer of this question. Yeah, this is your central dogma of molecular biology, whereby DNA forms DNA itself by the process of replication. DNA forms mRNA by transcription. It forms protein by translation, and by translation, protein is formed. So A is replication, B is transcription, C is translation, and D is protein, which is our option number 3. So that would be our answer in this case. Replication, transcription, translation, and protein. We go to the next question. The term used for the transfer of pollen grain from anther of one plant to the stigma of a different plant, which is genetically different. If it is genetically different, it has to be a type of cross-pollination, which is called as xenogamy. If it is of the same plant, different flower, it was geitonogamy. Whereas chasmogamy and clastogamy is regarding open and closed flowers. So this is not something which we have to bother about. They have asked you about a type of cross-pollination, which should be xenogamy. Now, if you remember that when we use ethidium bromide in the DNA, when we do gel electrophoresis and when you separate the DNA fragments, when you do the fragment separation and when you use ethidium bromide under UV light, we know that DNA appears in orange bands, bright orange bands. That would be our answer. The next question, which of the following is an incorrect statement? Now, the first statement says mature sieve tube elements possess a conspicuous nucleus. Now, this is the very first statement itself is wrong, because if you remember, mature RBCs and mature sieve tube elements are enucleated. That means they lack a nucleus. So this is an incorrect statement. So that would be our answer. The remaining question, of course, are statements which are given in your NCERT, and they are pretty straightforward question. I would not read the other question statements because the first statement itself is a very straightforward false statement. In spite of interspecific competition in nature, now this is, they have asked you how do competing species fight. Now there was a example of warblers which was given, whereby we had different feeding at different levels. This was called as resource partitioning. So this is an example of NCERT which talks about resource partitioning, which helps that competing species survive in spite of living in similar habitats. Jaime. Now Jaime were buds which were present in cups which are called as Jaime cup, and this is something which is found in liverworts. So liverworts would be the answer for this, which comes under Bryophyta. Match the list of 1 and 2. You've gone again match the column. Now they've talked about protoplasm fusion, which is again pomato, which is a fusion of potato and tomato. You have plant tissue culture, which is based on the property of totipotency. So A would be 2 and B would be 1. You have meristem culture, which helps to give rise to plants which are virus-free and disease-free. So C would be 4. Micropropagation gives you vegetative, it's kind of vegetative propagation. So it gives you something called as soma clones, if you remember the points about tissue culture. So A would be 2, B would be 1, C would be 4, and D would be 3. That's option number 2. We go on to the next question. The production of gametes by parents, the formation of zygote, the F1 plant and F2 plant can be understood. A diagram which was called as the Punnett square, which was given by Sir Reginald Punnett. Straightforward question according to me. Selaginella and Salvinia were pteridophytes which had a property of producing 2 different types of spores. That's why they were heterosporous pteridophytes. So again, a very, very easy question for me, according to me rather. The amount of nutrients present in carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus in the soil, mind that is standing state. Remember that if they talk you about the total amount of biomass in an organism, then the answer is standing crop. But when you talk of the total amount of inorganic nutrients in the soil, the answer is standing state. It is the total amount of inorganic nutrients found in the soil, which is this question is about. Amensilism. If you remember about amensilism, it is a type of feature in which one organism gets harmed but the other one is not benefited. So that is your answer. One organism being harmed, the other one not being benefited is a fact, which is a question of amensalism. We go to the next question now. Again, it's a question on match the column. They've asked you about cohesion. Now, cohesion, if you remember, is the force of attraction between similar molecules. If it is a force of attraction between similar molecules, that means it would be the mutual attraction between water molecules. So A would be option 2. Adhesion is the attraction between dissimilar molecule, which would be the attraction between water and the polar substances. So this is, water and the heads of the phospholipid in plasma membrane. So B would be an example of 4. B would be attraction towards polar surface. Now, surface tension, if you remember, is the attraction in liquid phase. So C would be 1. And guttation is the loss of water in the form of liquid through hydrathodes. So that would be D3. So A2, B4, C1, D3. And that would be our option number 1. Which of the following is not an application of PCR? Now, PCR does not involve isolated protein purification. That is completely different. The isolation protein that comes under obtaining your gene product step. PCR is basically gene amplification step, which is also used for diagnosis and for detection of gene mutation. So this is not involved in PCR technique. We go to the next question. During purification process of recombinant DNA technology, addition of chilled ethanol. If you remember, there is a step whereby you add chilled ethanol and that causes the DNA to precipitate. And when you remove it, it's called as spooling. There's a diagram also in your textbook about it. Answer for this question would be DNA. Now, this is your net primary productivity, and net primary productivity, if you remember, is gross primary productivity minus the loss by respiration. So the answer would be respiration loss of this in this question. The first stable product of carbon dioxide fixation in sorghum. If you remember, sorghum is a C4 plant, and in C4 plant, the first stable product is a 4-carbon acid, which is called as oxaloacetic acid. And that is why we call that pathway as the C4 pathway. So the answer in this case would be oxaloacetic acid. The next question is about which of the following algae produce carrageenan. If you remember your NCRT under algae, you remember that algin and carrageenan were 2 examples of hydrocolloids, whereby algin was produced by something which was called as brown algae, whereas carrageenan is something which is produced by red algae. So that would be our answer in this question. Which of the following statement is not correct? Pyramid of biomass in the sea is generally inverted. Yes, the pyramid of biomass in the sea is generally inverted. So it's a correct statement. Energy pyramid is upright, correct. Numbers is upright, correct. This is obviously incorrect. If we say the statement 1 is correct, obviously statement 2 becomes incorrect. So that answer would be 2 in this case. Again, a straightforward match the column, or rather an easy match the column. We all know cristae are infolding of the mitochondria. So the option A would be 3. Thylakoids are flat sac-like structures found within the plastids. So B would be 4. Centromere is the narrowing. So it's a primary constriction of the chromosome. Cisterna are parts of Golgi apparatus. So D would be 2. So A3, B4. A3, B4, C1, D2. Answer would be option number 3. Which of the following is not a secondary metabolite? If you remember, secondary metabolites are those compounds which are not actually useful for the plants in their metabolism. If they are useful in their metabolism, we call them as primary metabolites. Now, I don't have to tell you this, that amino acids and glucose are used by the plants in their metabolism. So they obviously become primary metabolites. So they are not secondary metabolites. So our answer in this case would be option number 2. Which of the following algae contains mannitol? Now, if you remember, mannitol is something which is found in brown algae. Out of this option, brown algae is Ectocarpus. So our answer in this case would be Ectocarpus. You should know that Gracilaria is an example of red algae. Volvox and Ulothrix are the examples of green algae. Since they have asked you about mannitol, which is a feature which is found in brown algae, our answer would be option number 1. Again, straightforward question which has been asked so many times in so many papers. And typical angiospermic embryo sac is 7-celled, 8-nucleated structure. So it is 7-celled and 8-nucleated structure, which is option number 1. Diadelphous stamen. Mind you, if they have asked you diadelphous stamen, the answer would be P. Okay, diadelphous. So if they ask you diadelphous stamen, your answer would be P. In case of China rose, the answer is monoadelphous. In case of citrus, you find the presence of a polyadelphous type of stamen. Since they have asked you diadelphous, the answer in this case would be option number 3. When gene targeting involving gene application is attempted in an individual's tissue to treat diseases, this is a straightforward example. They're telling you we are using gene to treat diseases. If you're using gene to treat diseases, it's called as gene therapy, which was, the example which was given in your textbook was about a disease which was called as adenosine deaminase deficiency, also called as severe combined immunodeficiency. So answer is gene therapy. Which of the following stages of meiosis involves division of centromere? Mind you, splitting of centromere occurs always in meiosis 2, and in meiosis 2, it occurs in the anaphase stage. So answer would be anaphase 2. Plant follow different pathway in response to different in the environment and phases of life. This was your example of larkspur and buttercup showing heterophily. This was the example of a property which is given in your plant growth chapter with diagram. That is the property of plasticity. If you remember, buttercup and larkspur are the examples under this. Which of the following plant is monoecious? Now, if you remember, chara is a diagram which is given in reproduction in plant organisms rather. In the chapter reproduction in organism, you have monoecious and dioecious plants as an example, whereby chara has been given as the example under monoecious plant. When the centromere is situated in the middle of 2 equal arms, if you have said 2 equal arms and middle, it is metacentric. Again, straightforward question, a chromosome which would be V-shaped with 2 equal arms is called as metacentric chromosome. The site of perception of light. Now, photoperiodism, the receptors are present in leaf. If they would have asked you vernalization, the answer would have been apex. If they have asked you about photoperiodism, the answer is leaf. The factor that leads to founder's effect. The factor that leads to founder's effect. If you remember, founder's effect was related to a set of population going to a completely new area. And that movement of the population completely to a new area is called as genetic drift. And that leads to something which is called as founder's effect with regards to your variation, with regards to change in your genetic equilibrium. So the answer would be option number 4. To destroy weeds, if you remember, we use a synthetic auxin, which is called as 2,4-D, 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid. So 2,4-D would be the answer for this. Again, straightforward question. It is used as a synthetic weedicide. That completes the compulsory section. That is your part 1, section A. We go on to the optional section whereby we have to solve 10 questions out of 15. Of course, I will be solving all 15 in this part. Here you have the match the column. Now, if you remember, Nitrococcus is a bacteria which is responsible for conversion ammonia to nitrite. So option would be A2. Then this nitrite gets converted into nitrate by something which is called as nitrobacter. So that is option number that is match the number 3. So it is D3A2. We have rhizobium, which is responsible for nitrogen fixation, which is conversion of atmospheric nitrogen to ammonia. So that becomes B4. Thiobacillus are the denitrifying bacteria. So C would be 1. So you have A2, B4, C1, D3, and that's option number 1. Select the correct pair. The first line says large colorless empty cells in the epidermis of grass cells are called as subsidiary cells. Wrong. If you remember, they are called as bulliform cells. In dicot leaves, vascular bundles are surrounded by large thick-walled cells called as conjunctive tissue. Wrong. conjunctive tissue is something which is found between xylem and phloem. It's the parenchyma which is between xylem and phloem in case of root. Cells of medullary rays that form part of the cambial ring are called as interfascicular cambium. Yes, this is a correct pair. There are two types of cambium. The one within the vascular bundle is intrafascicular cambium. The ones which are there in your medullary rays form the interfascicular cambium. So this is a correct pair. The last pair, loose parenchyma cells rupturing epidermis. These are complementary cells which form the lenticels, not spongy parenchyma. So this is also a wrong pair. So obviously our answer of this question would be option number 3. We go to the next question. Which of the following statement is correct? Fusion of two cells is called as karyogamy. Wrong. Fusion of two nuclei is karyogamy. Fusion of protoplasm between two motile and non-motile gametes is called as plasmogamy. Correct. If you remember, this is there in the chapter biological classification, whereby we remember fungi like Basidiomycetes have a property of showing the property of plasmogamy during reproduction. Organisms that depend on living plants are saprophytes. Wrong. They depend on dead organisms. Some of the organisms can fix atmospheric nitrogen with specialized cells called as sheath cells. Wrong. The cells are called as heterocyst. So obviously, statement 1, 3, and 4 are wrong. The statement 2 is correct, and that would be our answer. Identify the correct statement. In capping, methyl guanosine triphosphate is added to the 3' end of hnRNA. Wrong. It is added at the 5' end of hnRNA. RNA polymerase binds with Rho factor to terminate the process of transcription in bacteria. Yes, Rho factor is the name for the termination factor. Sigma factor is your initiation factor. The coding strand in a transcription unit is copied to mRNA. Wrong. The template strand is copied to mRNA. Split gene arrangement is a characteristic of prokaryotes. Wrong. It's also eukaryotic feature rather. So answer would be statement number 2. NT is N0, E raised to RT. Again, this is a question of exponential growth, also called as logarithmic growth, where E represents the base of natural log. So answer would be 3. Which of the following statement is incorrect? During aerobic respiration, the role of oxygen is limited to the terminal stage. Correct. It's called as terminal oxidation, the last step of ETS. In ETS or ETC, electron transport chain, one molecule of NADH plus H gives rise to 2 ATP, whereas one FADH2 gives rise to 3 ATP. We've got our incorrect statement here, because if you remember, NADH2 gives you 3 ATP and FADH2 gives you 2. So they have switched it. That is an incorrect statement. Again, I don't have to read the other statements, but we will do that. We know that ATP is formed by the head of the F1 particle, which is complex number 5. Oxidation reduction reaction produce proton gradient. Yes, it is the H plus movement which causes the chemiosmosis. So this is a correct statement, correct statement, correct statement. The option number 2 is an incorrect statement. That would be our answer. The next question is about the role of RNA polymerase type 3 in the process of transcription. If you know, we have 3 different types of RNA polymerase, type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 is responsible for the production of rRNA. Type 2 is responsible for the formation of hnRNA, which is the precursor of mRNA. Type 3 is the one which forms tRNA, SR, 5S type of RNA, and small nuclear type of RNAs. So our obviously answer would be option number 2. In some members, we have the following pairs of family of pollen grains retain their viability for months after release. If you remember, there are 3 families given in your NCERT whereby the pollen grains have a viability of months. One is Rosaceae, the other is Leguminosae, and the third would be Solanaceae. So our answer for this would be option number 4, which actually has 3 families: Rosaceae, Leguminosae, and Solanaceae. The next is about your interphase stages. We have S phase. Now, S phase, if you remember, is the phase of DNA replication. So A would be 4. Then you have G2 phase, which is the phase after DNA replication. So it's the stage which would be having, yeah, we can say G2 phase proteins would be synthesized. Quiescent stage obviously would be C2. It is inactive phase. Then you have the G1 phase. G1 phase is the phase which follows mitosis. So it's the interval between mitosis and the S phase. So our answer would be, our match would be D3. So A4, B1, A4, B1, C2 and D3. That would be our answer. That is option number 3. Nowadays, it is possible to detect the mutated gene causing cancer by allowing radioactive probe. Now, this is an example of your molecular diagnosis part of biotech chapter, whereby we were using probe DNA to check the mutated gene. Now, if you remember, the probe DNA was complementary to the normal gene. When the normal gene becomes mutated, the probe DNA is no longer complementary. If it's no longer complementary, you can't see it in the photographic film because the probe DNA is complementary to the normal gene, not complementary to the mutated gene. Now, if you go by that explanation, you would find this is the answer which correctly describes it, because it says the mutated gene will not be seen in the photographic film because the probe DNA does not bind it. If you remember, probe DNA was the DNA which was single-stranded, radioactive, and complementary to the normal gene, not to the mutated gene. Our answer in this case would be option number 3. Plasmid PBR322. This is the plasmid which we have the diagram. Here they are talking of the PST1, which is the restriction enzyme present in the ampicillin resistance gene. Now they are telling you that they have used this restriction endonuclease to insert the beta galactosidase gene into the plasmid. Now, if you use PST1 as the enzyme in the gene, that means you are actually introducing the new gene in the ampicillin resistance gene. That means the ampicillin resistant gene would become non-functional. If it becomes non-functional, that means the E. coli will not have resistance against ampicillin. In that case, our answer would be option number 1, because you have inserted your gene into the ampicillin resistance gene, thereby making it inactive. So our answer would be option number 1 in this case. Now, this is your the floral formulas which are there in case of all the families. Now, the pretty straightforward one, if you want to see, is when you see which out of the family has perianth. Now, if you see all of these family, the perianth is there with P only in option number C. And if you remember, perianth is a property of Liliaceae. So in this case, your answer becomes C2. Your option match becomes C2. Now, if you remember this type of feature, that is C1 plus 2 plus 2, this was something which was a type of estivation which was called as the vexillary estivation. And vexillary estivation is a feature what we have in Fabaceae. So A would be 3. You have B, which is the floral formula of Solanaceae. So that is 4. And the option D is the floral diagram which is given as the first floral diagram of the mustard family, that is your Brassicaceae family, which is option number D1. So rather the match would be D1. So we have A3, B4, C2 and D1. That is your option number 1. So that becomes your answer in this question. Which of the following statement is incorrect? Both ATP and NADPH2 are synthesized in non-cyclic photophosphorylation. Correct. Stroma lamellae have only PS1. Correct. Granulamellae have both PS1 and PS2. Correct. Cyclic photophosphorylation involves both PS1 and PS2. Wrong, because cyclic involves only PS1. So our answer in this case would be option number 4. That is the incorrect statement here. Match the list 1 with list 2. This is the question about bonds. Proteins show peptide bonds. So A would be 4. Unsaturated fatty acids do have double bonds. And so the B would be 1. Nucleic acids show phosphodiester bonds, that is C2. And polysaccharides are monosaccharides held by glycosidic bonds. So D would be 3. So A4, B1, C2, D3. That's option number 1. We go to the next question, the last question of part 1. The DNA fingerprinting involves identifying differences in some specific regions of DNA sequence. Now, this was the sequence which was called as your VNTR, variable number of tandem repeats. So these were the repetitive DNA, which was helpful as the process which Alec Jeffreys used as the base for DNA fingerprinting. So our answer in this case would be option number 2, that is repetitive DNA. The first question in the Zuo section now talks about which statement is wrong with regards to the nature of smooth muscles. Now, if you remember, smooth muscles have no striation. So this statement is correct. They are involuntary. It's correct. Communication amongst the cells is performed by intercalated discs. Now, this, if you remember, is a feature of cardiac muscles. It is not a feature of smooth muscles. So this is the incorrect statement. Hence, our answer of this question would be option number 3. The endomembrane system is the question about the next. This question is about the endomembrane system. Endomembrane system, if you remember, includes cell organelles like endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, lysosomes, and vacuoles. Mitochondria is not a part of the endomembrane system. And so this option gets ruled out, this option gets ruled out, this option gets ruled out. Our answer would be option number 2. This question is about the insulin, which is again a question on biotechnology application. If you remember that the original insulin, the inactive insulin, which is called as prohormone, has A, B, and C peptide, out of which if you remove the C peptide, you get the mature insulin. Now, the first statement says C peptide is not present in the mature insulin. That's correct, because mature insulin has only A and B peptide. The insulin produced by rDNA technology has C peptide. Wrong. rDNA technology produces only A and B peptide. The proinsulin has C peptide. Correct. This is a correct statement. It has A, B, and C, all the 3. A peptide and B peptides are interconnected by disulfide bridges. Yes, even that is correct. So statement A, C, and D are the correct statements. Our answer in this question would be option number 3. Venereal disease is another term for sexually transmitted diseases. Sexually transmitted diseases spreads through unsterilized needle, not through sterile needle. So this is not the correct statement. Yes, it does spread through transfusion of blood from an infected person. It does spread from the infected mother to the fetus. It does not spread through kissing or inheritance, because they are not. This is not the genetic disease. So answer would be B and C, which are modes of spread of venereal diseases. Select the favorable condition regarding the formation of oxyhemoglobin in the alveoli. In the alveoli, oxyhemoglobin formation requires high PO2 and low CO2. Automatically, if it is low CO2, the hydrogen would also be less. Of course, even low temperature favors of formation of oxyhemoglobin. So low temperature, low CpCO2, high O2, less H plus is the one which favors formation of oxyhemoglobin in the alveoli. If they would have asked dissociation of oxyhemoglobin in the tissue, then your answer would have been this. Since they have asked formation of oxyhemoglobin, our answer is option number 1. Match the column. This is a question from Kingdom Animalia as a chapter. If you remember, Physalia is the name for Portuguese man of war. So answer A matches with option line 2. Limulus is your living fossil under Arthropoda. So it's B3. Ankylostoma, the spelling error is here. Ankylostoma is your hookworm. So that's option number 4, or rather C4. Pinctada is the name for oyster. So D1. So you've got A2, B3, C4, and D1. C4 and D1. Yes, it matches with option number 3, I suppose. So A2, B3, C4, and D1. Yes, so that's our answer, option number 3. We go to the next question. In a cross between male and female, both heterozygous for sickle cell anemia. Mind you, heterozygous for sickle cell anemia, I can represent it by writing one normal gene, the other sickle cell gene. the other parent also has a normal gene and a sickle cell gene. This is an example of a cross whereby you will have HBS, HBS with multiplying 2. So if you remember, you get HB, HB, which is normal. Then you get HB, HBS, which is heterozygous. They don't suffer from the sickle cell anemia. Again, would be HB, HBS. The other would be HBS, HBS. If you remember, the ratio what you get is 3:1, whereby 3 do not suffer and one of them suffers. Answer would be 25%. The next is the match, which is from the chapter Microbes in Human Welfare, whereby if you remember Aspergillus niger, Acidobacter aceti. Now Acidobacter aceti, if you remember, is responsible for giving acetic acid. Aspergillus niger gives you citric acid. Clostridium gives you butyric acid, so that is C4, and Lactobacillus gives you lactic acid. So we've got A3B1C4D2, A3B1C4D2, and that's option number 1 for us. Sphincter of Oddi. If you remember, the hepatic duct and the common bile duct, and the pancreatic duct both fuse together and open into the duodenum. That opening is guarded by the sphincter of Oddi. And so the answer in this case would be the junction of the hepatopancreatic duct. Jejunum, duodenum does not have any sphincter. Gastroesophageal junction has something which is called as the cardiac sphincter, and ileocecal junction has something which is called as the ileocecal valve. So in this case, our answer would be option number 2, which is not a following objective of biofortification. If you remember biofortification, the aim is to improve the nutrient value of crops. If it is to improve the nutrient value of crops, option 1, 3, and 4 match. Option number 2 doesn't. So our answer would be option number 2. Erythropoietin is a hormone which is produced by the kidney. There is only one option which talks about the kidney here, that is the juxtaglomerular cells of the kidney, and that's why the answer would be option number 4. Which of the following organisms bear hollow and pneumatic long bones? Hollow and pneumatic long bones, if you remember, is found in the class Aves, and out of these options, the option which is there under A's is neophron. If you remember, this is the name for vulture. Vulture belongs to Aves, and that's why it will have hollow bones. So our answer would be option number 1. Centrioles undergo duplication during the S phase of interphase. Straightforward question. Our answer would be option number 1. Dobson's unit. Dobson's unit, if you remember, was used to measure the thickness of ozone. So ozone layer thickness is measured with regards to Dobson unit. So answer would be option 3. Which one of the following belongs to family Muscidae? This is there in your chart for your classification under your living world examples. Housefly is the Musca genus, which belongs to the Muscidae family. The statements which we have to read now: metagenesis is observed in helminths. It is a false statement. Metagenesis is seen in Coelenterata, whereby you have the polyp and the medusa stage. Echinodermata are triploblastic and coelomate. True statement. Roundworms, that is Ascalmenthes, have organ system level. That's true statement. Your comb plates would be in Ctenophora, help in digestion. That is wrong. They help in locomotion. You have water vascular system, which is a characteristic of echinoderms. That's a true statement. So B, C, and E are true statements. So our option in this case would be option number 4. For effective treatment of diseases, early diagnosis, understanding its pathophysiology is important. Now, this is a question which talks about molecular diagnosis technique, and one of the technique which was used in molecular diagnosis, which we have learned in 2 parts. It is there in your genetic section. It's also there in your aid section. Is a technique which is called as enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, which is ELISA. So that would be our answer. Receptors for sperm. Now, if you remember, the sperm is responsible for binding to the ovum at the zona pellucida. If the sperm is going to bind to the ovum at zona pellucida, So the receptor for the sperm would be present on zona pellucida. So that would be the answer in this case of the question. Chronic autoimmune disease affecting neuromuscular junction leading to fatigue. Now, the only autoimmune disease what you have in this chapter is myasthenia gravis. If you know, arthritis is a degenerative disease. Muscular dystrophy is a genetic disease. Gout was a disease which is a metabolic disease because of accumulation of uric acid. The only autoimmune disease in this disorder is myasthenia gravis. So our answer in this case would be option number 3. Which of the following is an example of hormone releasing IUD? CUT, CU7, and multi-load 375 are all copper containing IUDs. The IUD, which is a hormone releasing IUD, is LNG20. There is another example in your NCRT, which is Progestasert. So Progestasert and LNG20 are examples of hormone releasing IUD. So in this case, our answer would be option number 2. Match the column. Again, this is from the chapter Reproductive Health. Vaults are responsible for blocking, cervical caps and vaults are responsible for blocking the entry of sperm. So statement A will match with 1. IUDs increase the sperm phagocytosis. So B will match with 3. Vasectomy is removal of vas deferens, rather cutting and blocking of vas deferens. So C would be 2. Tubectomy is blocking of the fallopian tubes. So D would be 4. So A1, B3, C2, D4. A1, B3. Yeah, that matches with your option number 2. The next question. Metamerism is continuous segmentation, or rather true segmentation, which is a feature of Annelida. Canal system is a feature what you see in Porifera. Comb plates are ciliated plates, rows of cilia found in Ctenophora. Cnidoblasts are stinging cells found in Cilienterata. That's why Cilienterata are also called as cnidaria. So you have A3, B4, C2, D1. A3, B4, C2, D1 is option number 3. So that's our correct answer. The fruit fly has 8 chromosomes in each cell. That means they have said the diploid number is 8. During interphase of mitosis, if the number of chromosomes at G1 is 8, what would be the number of chromosome in S phase? Now, mind you, even if the G1 chromosome count is 8, during S phase, the DNA undergoes replication, but the chromosome count remains the same. The only difference is because of DNA replication, every chromosome now has 2 arms. So always remember, after S phase, the chromosome count does not change. It remains the same. So our answer would be 8, which is option number 1. The next question. During the process of gene amplification using PCR, if very high temperature is not maintained in the beginning, so they have said if you don't maintain high temperature in the beginning step is the denaturation step, which requires a temperature of around 91 degrees Celsius. They are saying if you don't do that, what will happen? What will happen is denaturation will be affected. So our answer would be option number 3. Because denaturation is the beginning step requiring high temperature of 91 degrees Celsius. Now, if you remember, A is equal to T and G is equal to C, the sum total of this should be 50%. The sum total of this should be 50%. That's your shortcut what we use. So anyways, if A is equal to T, if A is equal to T and A is 30%, automatically T becomes 30%. Right? The sum total of this should be 50%. The sum total of this should be 50%. So this becomes 20% and this becomes 20%. If you remember purine pyrimidine ratio, purine pyrimidine ratio has to be 1:1. That means A plus G should be 50%, T plus C should be 50%. They've given you value of A. By that you get the value of T. That is 30%. Once you get T is 30%, you have only one option which fits. That is option number 3. Which enzyme is responsible for conversion of inactive fibrinogen to fibrin? If you remember the step of coagulation, thrombokinase helps to convert prothrombin into thrombin. And then this thrombin helps to do this step. They have told you fibrinogen to fibrin conversion. The answer in this case would be option number 1, that is thrombin. That's our answer. Succus entericus is straightforward question for intestinal juice. Option number 2. Identify the incorrect pair. Alkaloids, codeine, yes. Morphine and codeine are alkaloids. Toxin, abrin, yes, correct. Lectins, concanavalin A, correct. Drugs, ricin, wrong. Ricin is not a drug. Ricin is a toxin along with abrin. So answer, which is an incorrect pair, is option number 4. Which is the stage of meiotic prophase shows terminalization of chiasmata? Again, straightforward question, terminalization step, whereby the point of crossing over goes to the end, is the step of diakinesis. Straightforward answer, option number 3. Person with AB blood group. If you remember, AB blood group has A antigen and B antigen on the RBC, and he has no antibodies in the plasma. No antibodies in the plasma. Again, that's the answer, option number 4. A specific recognition sequence identified by endonuclease. If you remember, endonucleases act on a specific recognition sequences which have a tendency to be inverted repeated sequences, which are also called as palindrome. You have the example of GAATTC for EcoR1 enzyme, palindromic sequence. You know, the word Malayalam has been explained in that part of your textbook. Option number 3 would be our answer. Which of the following characteristic is incorrect with respect to cockroach? A ring of gastric CK is present at the junction of the midgut and the hindgut. Our very first statement is incorrect because gastric CK, also called as hepatic CK, are present at the junction of the foregut and midgut. So this is our incorrect statement. They have asked you to find that out. So it's our option number 1. The other options, as you see, are straightforward statements, which are correct statements about hypopharynx, about genital pouch, and about the anal cerci. The first statement is an incorrect statement. Which of the following RNAs is not required for the synthesis of protein? We know 3 types of RNA which help in protein synthesis. siRNA is not involved. Answer would be option 4. Very easy question according to me. Which is the only enzyme that has a capability to catalyze initiation, elongation, and termination in prokaryotes? If you remember, we learned 3 different types of RNA polymerase, type 1, type 2, and type 3. But in case of the process of transcription in bacteria, there is only 1 type of RNA polymerase, which we call as DNA-dependent RNA polymerase. So our answer would be option number 2. The next question is about the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide at the alveoli. Now, at the alveoli, if you remember, the oxygen levels are high and the carbon dioxide levels are low. At alveoli, you have PO2 of 104 mm of Hg and PCO2 of 40. So our answer would be option number 1. If you remember, 40 and 45 is deoxygenated blood. Oxygen of 95 is in oxygenated blood. And 159 partial pressure is atmospheric air. Since they have asked you about alveoli, in this case, our answer would be option number 1. That completes your section A of zoology, which was your compulsory section. We go on to the optional section of 15 questions. Which of the following is not a step in multiple ovulation and embryo transfer technology? The first statement is cow is administered hormone having LH-like activity. Here is your incorrect statement, because the cow is administered with hormone having FSH type of activity. So that's your incorrect statement. Your first statement itself is the answer for you. That is option number 1. The other statement about 6 to 8 eggs, artificial insemination, and 8 to 32 cell stage are correct. They have told you to find out the incorrect statement. Option number 1 is the answer. Which of the following secretes hormone relaxin? If you see the NCERT, it says in the latter phase of pregnancy, relaxin is produced by the ovary. So it rules out this option and this option. Of course, Graafian follicle is not formed during pregnancy. So it leaves with the answer of option number 2. Which of the following, during muscular contraction, which of the following events occur? Now, H zone disappears. Yes, the 2 actin filaments come closer, so H zone would disappear. A band widens. If you remember, A band, which is your dark band, does not change in length, so that's wrong. I band reduces in width. Yes, it does, because your actin filaments move. Myosin hydrolyzes ATP. Yes, it has ATPase activity in the head, so it's a correct statement. Z lines attached to actins are pulled inwards. Correct. The Z lines move, so the length of sarcomere reduces. So statement A, C, D, and E happen. A, C, D, and E happen. So statement 1, option 1 would be our correct answer. The statements about lipids. Lipids having only single bonds are called as unsaturated fatty acids. Wrong. Lipids having double bonds are unsaturated fatty acids. Lecithin is a phospholipid. Correct. Trihydroxypropane is glycerol. Correct. Palmitic acid has 20 carbon. Arachidonic acid has 16 carbon. In fact, they have reversed it. So both these statements are false. That means statement A, D, and E are false. Statement B and C are correct. So our answer would be option number 3. Which of the following statement about histones is wrong? If you remember, histones were forming octamers, the molecules of octamers. So this is correct. Histones are basic proteins. Here it says acidic. So this is a wrong statement. They are rich in basic amino acids like lysine and arginine. And since they are basic, they carry positive charge. So statement 1, 3, and 4 are correct. Statement number 2 is incorrect. That would be our answer. This is the match the column from the chapter Evolution, Adaptive Radiation. We have examples of marsupials as well as Darwin's finches. So A statement will match with 4th statement. Convergent evolution is responsible for producing organs called as analogous organs. That would be wings of butterfly and bird. So statement 3. Divergent evolution leads to something which is called as homologous organs, which is the forelimbs of mammals. So B, C will match with 2. Evolution by anthropogenic action is creation of new species because of humans. They have given you examples of DDT resistant mosquitoes and insects. So statement number 1 will match with D. So A4, B3, C2, D1. A4, B3, C2, D1. Answer in this case would be option number 1. Of course, there is a typing error here. This should be 1. This should be 2 rather. So option number 1 would be the correct answer in this case. Option number 1 would be the correct answer in this case with a spelling error. So A would match with 4, B will match with 3, C will match with 2, and D will match with 1. So option number 1 would be the correct answer. The next question is about cell junctions. Now they've asked you about 2 types of cell junctions. One which stops leakages. If you remember, leakage stopping is done by something which is called as tight junctions. So the first one is tight junctions. Communication by ion transfer is done by something which is called as gap junctions. They have told you about tight and gap junctions respectively. So our answer would be option number 2. Prostomium. Now this is a question which we generally wouldn't have expected because earthworm and frog are not technically included in your portion. But luckily they have asked you in your optional part, you can skip this question. Any which ways, prostomium is a cover which is ahead of the first segment. Okay, it is a cover around the mouth which helps to the earthworm to burrow. At the same time, it also has sensory receptors in it. Since it acts as a cover of the mouth, this is the first statement which is correct. It helps in burrowing, so this would be the second statement which will be correct. It has sensory receptors, so third would be the correct statement. The fourth statement is wrong because the first segment of the cockroach is called as peristomium, not prostomium. Prostomium is the cover of the mouth. So statement A, B, C are correct. Our answer would be option number 1. Of course, this would have been the optional question which most of us would leave because it's from the part of earthworm. Adenosine deaminase deficiency is a deficiency what I spoke about before. It's this deficiency which occurs because of lymphocyte enzyme deficiency, and that leads to dysfunction of your immune system. This is again a question which many of you wouldn't have expected because it comes from the table of the genetic code. The first statement says that codon AUG codes for methionine and phenylalanine. Wrong. AUG codes only for methionine. Phenylalanine is coded by UUU, not by AUG. So the first statement, of course, is a false statement. The second statement talks about AAA and AAG both coded by lysine. Yes, that's a true statement. Lysine is coded by both of them. So statement 1 is correct. Statement 2 is statement 1 is incorrect. Statement 2 is correct. Our answer in this case would be option number 4. We go to the next question. A person goes to high altitudes and experiences altitude sickness. Now, why exactly does a person suffer from altitude sickness? It's because of lack of oxygen, or rather deficiency of oxygen in the atmosphere. So the first statement talks about altitude sickness. The second statement tells you the body does not get sufficient oxygen. So both the assertion and reason are correct, and that is the reason, is the correct explanation of the assertion. So the answer in this case would be option number 1. Both assertion and reason are true, and the R is the correct explanation. Again, assertion, reason type of questions are not expected in Neet. That is why it has been given in the optional section. Answer in this case would be option number 1. Now, this is a part which is your part under adaptation. If you remember, Allen's rule is about the surface area for heat loss, and it gives you the example of small ears which are found in polar animals like polar seals. So A would be 4. Physiological adaptation, you have the example of kangaroo rat showing oxidation, that is B1. Behavioral adaptation, they have given you example of desert lizard showing busking and other properties, so C would be 2. Under biochemical adaptation, they have talked about special enzymes found in marine fish which help them to survive in greater depth, so B would be 3. So A4, B1, C2 and D3, that is option number 3 which matches in this question. The next question is about health and disease chapter, human health and disease chapter. Filariasis is caused by which area? So our option A would be statement A would match with 3. Amoebiasis is caused by entamoeba, so B would match with 4. Pneumonia is caused by Haemophilus, so C statement would match with statement 1. Ringworm is caused by trichophyton fungus, so D would match with 2. So A3, B4, C1, D2, that's option number 2. We go to the next question. Which of these is not important component for the initiation of parturition? Now, parturition is helped by high estrogen, prostaglandins, and oxytocin. Mind you, high estrogen, prostaglandins, and oxytocin all play a role in parturition. Prolactin plays a role in lactation, not parturition. So again, according to me, a straightforward question. Our answer would be option number 4. This is a match the column about your bone types and your joint type. Now, scapula, if you remember, is a triangular flat bone, so A would match with 4. Cranium contains sutures, which are fibrous joints, so B would match with 3. Sternum is a flat bone present in the mid-ventral part, so C would match with 2. Vertebral column has intervertebral discs, which are cartilaginous joint, so D will match with 1. So A4, B3, C2, D1. A4, B3, C2, D1. Yes, that's your option number 4. That's the last question of your Neet paper. As I already told you, the paper was pretty straightforward. The only 2 questions which would be called as different would be the question which were there in zoology, would be, or rather 3 questions which would be different or unexpected. One is a question on earthworm, the other was an assertion and reason type of question, and the third question which was there was about your genetic code table about codons and their matching amino acids. But as I already told you, all these 3 questions were given in your optional section, giving the opportunity to the students to exclude them from their solving. So that's regarding the entire Neet biology paper. This is Dr. Harshad Bhanushali. Thank you. All the best for your results.